Hello everybody, I'm Phil Liggett, as ever with Paul Sherwin in the commentary box, and a warm welcome to a rather chilly 53rd running of the Het Volk Classic in Belgium. A race which starts in Ghent and races to nearby Lokeren for the finish, in all a total of 202 kilometres. And the riders on the start line full of hope for the season ahead, as they now look forward to what they hope will be the best one yet. We're looking at the early pictures of the breakaway, and we'll be leaving these pictures very shortly and taking you to the start, where the race started a few hours ago now, before it whittled the big field down to just a handful of riders over the cobbled roads of an area of Belgium made famous by the ravaging of world wars. And this now is St. Peter's Plain in Ghent, the 25 teams coming to the start. Frank Vandenbroek hoping for a great season after doing so well in his first Tour de France last year. And this man, Laurent Brochard, a brilliant winner of the World Championship when he came as a workhorse. Peter van Petegem, surprised last year with his victory in this event, lives on the course actually in Opbrakel. Rolf Sorensen, always good for a classic win every year. And these look like the legs of Tom Steels, the Belgian national champion, who finished second in this event 1 year ago. And Tom Steels, a sprinter. And talking of sprinters, not a pure sprinter anymore, Johan Museeuw, but certainly one of the most popular and best single-day bike riders currently on the circuit. He's never had a place in the top three in this event, and neither has the Frenchman Richard Virenque, winner of the King of the Mountains in the Tour de France on 4 successive occasions. Well, there they are, Paul, all 25 teams. It's the time of the year when they're all moving out full of hope, isn't it?
It certainly is. Het Volk is a very important event for these riders because they've trained right out on the early part of the season on the Côte d'Azur, and this is a chance to see just how many times the Belgians have won over the last few years. Look at that, 1990 and 1992, Johan Capio. The following 2 years, then Wilfred Nelissen. So this really is an event for the Belgians, and really early on a breakaway came out, and it was made up of 8 riders originally, Phil, and one of the riders in that group was last year's winner of Ghent-Wevelgem, Philippe Gaumont, but it's now whittled itself down to just 7 men.
Well, in all there are 11 climbs on the course for Het Volk this year, the last one being the Berend Dries. And this rider now, number 11 on the start sheet, is Peter van Petegem. He is so inspired by this race. He trains on the roads literally outside of his front door. He has good form from Mallorca, and obviously, Paul, he's found his way into the right move again.
He certainly has, but this is a very good move, and for, I think, André Schmeel, it's an important year as well, because this is the first year when he's actually being given the nationality of Belgium, so he's riding for his own country for the first time. It's very strange, though, because this man has had several different nationalities, and I think finally he's happy with the choice of Belgium as a country to spend the rest of his life.
That's absolutely right. The arguments over the years as a journalist as to whether this man is Russian, Moldavian, Italian or Belgian. Well, right now he's Belgian. Now we've got a move here by Rabobank. They're trying to get some action out of this group. Mark Wouters.
All of these riders very worried about the composition of the group. The number 221 is Fabio Baldato. Not having a great season so far, but hopefully later on he will start to get the legs, because he hasn't had a victory at all since 1996. When he won 2 stages of the Tour of Spain, but he always has ridden well in the Belgian events like this. But he won't get much help from the Rabobank riders, because Max van Heeswijk is in that leading group of 7 riders. Van Heeswijk, a very good rider if that group of 7 stays away for the sprint.
Well, a lot of steady work being done here. Richard Virenque was on the attack early on in this race, around about the 98 kilometre point when they climbed the Muur de Grammont, and that coming just a few climbs after the old Quaremont. If any of you have been on our trips there with the World Cycling Productions around this time of the year, then you'll know exactly what we're talking about now. And the old Quaremont is a painful climb at best, isn't it?
It certainly is, and it's very decisive in Het Volk as well, because it comes after just 50 kilometres or 30 miles, so it really is important. But you can see here, Phil, the advantage of that group. The André Schmeel group started off with 53 seconds, and it's now gone out to 1 minute and 15, so it looks as if they're starting to pull away, but the major teams are all represented here.
Well, 7 riders, that's Schmeel going through now. He has to be one of the most consistent classic riders we've had in recent years. In fact, André Schmeel, he doesn't win a lot, although of course he won Paris-Roubaix a couple of years ago, but he is always at or near the front, and obviously a marked man, and that's maybe why he doesn't quite get the wins he might deserve. The World Championship rings here on the shoulders of Stuart O'Grady, a former track rider, well, not former, still is a very good track rider, but he now wants to concentrate on road racing. And rider 2 here, Gianluca Bortolami, former winner of the World Cup races in Zurich and in Leeds in Great Britain, and coming back, I think, after a nasty breaking of his elbow in the Tour of Italy.
So here's another rider in that group we haven't spoken a lot about so far this season. Arvis Pizik's riding for the brand new Jack and Jones team. Strange name for a team, but it's a brand new Danish team made up with Brian Holm and Jesper Skibby moving away from TVM and Telecom to try and make themselves a good home team. And one of the shareholders in that team, in fact, is Bjarne Riis, so that might make it a little bit difficult on the road sometimes.
It's a case of putting your mouth where your money is, and that's nice to see that Bjarne Riis, the Tour de France winner for Denmark 2 years ago almost now, helping the sport in his own country develop. And the Danish have produced some tremendous bike riders in recent years. That's where we are now as we head up towards the 161 kilometre point, and you can see as you check on the mileage there to 171 how the gap has fluctuated, but it hasn't really got away, has it?
It certainly hasn't. There's a lot of pressure in that group behind, but that group behind is only around about 25 riders, so there are enough men there to keep the pressure on at the front, making sure that this group doesn't go more than a minute clear. And because the main field can speed up over the last few kilometres, they can still put these guys back. But the thing about the race now, Phil, is it used to be that the hills decided Het Volk, but now they're so far from the finish in Lokeren that the decision always now comes down to the cobblestones, and there's 3 sections of very difficult cobblestones left, and I think that'll suit this man, Johan Museeuw, because although he hasn't won anything so far this year, he's already in pretty good shape.
And Museeuw has got to be the man to watch in this breakaway. They're obviously going to show a lot of respect for Peter van Petegem, because he's on a high, having won this event last year, and has made no secret over the winter in 1 or 2 articles I've read that he's making this one of his aims of the season. And there is Peter van Petegem now, number 11, taking the group through at the front, riding for the TVM team. Stuart O'Grady. Well, I really feel, Paul, that Stuart is in for a big win this year, and I would expect it to come in an early classic rather than a later one.
Certainly, I think alongside with his teammate Henk Vogels, these 2 Aussies really want to get out, and they excel in the Belgian races. We saw them riding very well last year in the Tour of Flanders and Paris-Roubaix, and I think they've come this year to these kind of events with a lot more morale, and they feel that they've got a great chance of taking one of them home back to Australia. But O'Grady, as you said before, a great track rider, but when it comes to these tough Belgian classics, he certainly knows how to ride them.
He's such an aggressive bike rider. I saw him in January this year riding and winning lapping the field, in fact, in Port Arlington, which is in Victoria, down on the St. Port Philip Bay there, and he rode so well as he made his preparation for his transfer over to Europe for the rest of the year. He's such an aggressive bike rider, he hardly waits for the race to start and he gets into an early move. He tamed himself a little bit today, he waited, and I think he's read the right move here, because I don't think what's left of the bunch is going to come back today. Remember, big variance in the fitness at this time of the year. The day is February the 28th, and these riders now are just getting the feel of racing on the roads again for another long season which lies ahead. Nice echelon forming from the helicopter, indicating the wind coming from the left of our picture.
It's going to be interesting to see how they handle the last few sections of Cobblesfield, because one man in that group is very dangerous when it comes down to the sprint, and that's Max van Heeswijk. Rode for the Motorola team for several years and now changed across to ride for Rabobank, won a stage of the Tour of Spain last year, and already in the Ruta del Sol this season he's got a victory under his belt, so he must feel quite confident. And I think we're likely to see attacks coming from Museeuw and Schmiel towards the end here, because those 2 men are really the super specialists of the cobbled classics.
I couldn't agree more, because if it goes down to the sprint, O'Grady's got to be in with a shout, and you've always got to watch out for Gianluca Bortolami. Now back into the chase group here, just caught a glimpse of the Maillot Arc-en-Ciel, which is the World Championship jersey of Laurent Brochard, a chance for him to really excel this year. Of course, it's known as the curse of cycling. When you pull on that World Championship jersey, then you tend to win nothing and have crashes, and we wouldn't wish that this year on Laurent Brochard, because he really is the most interesting bike rider.
He certainly has a chance there to see Brian Holm in his new jersey riding for the Jack and Jones, and he's very happy alongside Jesper Skibby. These 2 riders, although they've for many years ridden on separate teams, now riding for the first time together. They're getting on very well indeed, and it'll be interesting to see. It's always difficult when a new team comes onto the block, but certainly those 2 men have the experience to raise the level of this new Jack and Jones team.
Now watching the little group here, nobody seems to be missing a turn here. They've got themselves going nicely at the moment.
That's Frank Vandenbroek, the second Mapei rider there with the dark glasses on. He'd be very happy to be in this group, because he'll be trying to pay back, I think, a little bit Johan Museeuw, because these riders realise that Museeuw, being such a proud Belgian from West Flanders, would like to get a victory here in Het Volk. And as you said earlier, he's never really been super in Het Volk. He's excellent condition last year, could have taken him to a victory here, but he wasn't able to do that. But this year, in a small group like that, with the cobblestones remaining towards the finish, it could well be that this will be Museo's day.
Well, certainly a lot of the teammates, Paul, have got themselves organised at the front here now, trying to slow down the counter-attack. Second in line is Servais Canavan from the TVM team, who's settled in nicely as a professional now. He was struggling a little bit when he turned pro, but now he's really one of the big boys on the TVM squad, which is the way progression comes. Brignoli is the man setting the pace here for the Riso Scott team. There's the finish now, just on 20 miles away, 32 kilometres. And there's work being done, but it's not coordinated, is it? Because the GAN team have got two riders up here. Backstead is one of them, the Swede on the squad, trying to disrupt the chase. And nobody is helping Brignoli at all to bring back that breakaway. So it's all in good for the team out front right now. And they're represented by so many different teams. They've got a lot of friends back here.
They certainly have. You can see TVM queuing up behind, and the GAN riders not wanting to do any work at all, because those teams feel that they have a great chance of victory with their men who are in the front. The reason Brignoli is on the front here trying to work is because Fabio Baldato is in this group now. If he can bring it back together and get this 20-man group up to the leading group of 7, then his Italian teammate has a great chance of winning. But at the moment, he's not getting any help from anyone. A man in this group as well is Laurent Brochard. Brochard will sit in the wheels as well, because his teammate Gianluca Bortolami is in that leading group of 7. But coming up very shortly, they were going to start getting this very repetitive series of cobblestones. There are 3 sections of cobblestones, and the last one is just around about 10 kilometres from the finish.
Well, Schmilly's just the man to go on the cobbles, as he's shown us a lot in the past. Winner of Paris-Roubaix back in 1994. He had a great classic season last year. 4th in the Tour de Flanders, 2nd in Ghent-Wevelgem, 4th in Paris-Roubaix, crowning off his season with what is a world record for a classic race and a high average speed in Paris Tours when he won that.
Certainly he's already got a win under his belt this year as well, across the border in Spain, with a great victory there in the Trofeo Louis Puig just before the Tour of Valencia. So all of these riders had some very good early season preparation in the hot weather down in the southern part of the Iberic Peninsula, as is Max van Heeswijk. Max starting to look a lot more comfortable now. He's a former black belt in judo, so he's definitely a rider who knows how to defend himself when it comes down to the big sprints at the end. But I think this man certainly has a great sprint.
And former member of the Motorola team in his first year as a pro. Got a nice personality, Max. Now they're heading up towards these last few stretches of cobblestones, which will shake them around a bit. I'm not too sure whether Bortolami will like the cobblestones, although he was part of that classic finish. Museo Taffy Bortolami, 1, 2, 3 for Mappa in Paris-Roubaix a couple of years back. 50 seconds, so Brochard's group, we're calling it the group of Brochard, but in fact the world champion hasn't been seen too much at the front of the chase. The Italians are trying to chase down, but the gap is closing. So these guys are gambling on jumping away on the cobbles, I think, because they must sense, Paul, they're losing a little bit of the impetus in this chase.
That's the problem, I think, these days with Het Volk, with the change to the finish in Lokeren. It is so far from the final climbs, the climb of Berendries, all the way to the finish, which even if you do get a good group, as this group got away, of 7 or 8 riders prepared to work consistently to consolidate on a lead, the riders behind still have such a great chance of coming back, and at the moment they've never really got more than 1 minute and 15 seconds, so the race is far from over. What could happen, as you say, is once we do start to come to the cobbles, this group now will start to pick up the pace a little bit, and then behind, the work that was being done by those riders will be a lot more difficult to organise.
Well, the team car advising them, I think, that the gap is coming down, at least just one of the riders there. Well, I've got nothing but nice things to say about Lokeren, Paul. About 100 years ago, I was in a 6-man break and I got 3rd in Lokeren, so I'm going to live with that forever.
Well, it's in fact just been signed up for the next 4 years that Lokeren is going to host the finish of Het Volk, and strangely enough, I always used to really appreciate it being Ghent, because the Het Volk newspaper is centred in Ghent, and that's where the race for many years was based. And it has really changed the face of Het Volk by moving it away there, because the climbs are so different, but it does give the sprinters a chance to get over the mountains of the Flanders and get back together and have a chance of getting a crack at victory in Het Volk.
In fact, if any of you ever get along to Belgium to watch bike racing, the Het Volk newspaper is probably the best newspaper. It's in the Flemish language, but all results seem the same, don't they? And they do cover every result in bike racing from around the world, and of course in Belgium, where there are plenty of bike races every day. So they've been very supportive over the years of cycling, and this race beginning back in 1945, and Het Volk has stayed loyal to this event ever since. They call it in fact the 53rd Het Volk today, but there's only been 52, including this one, because back in 1986 the race was cancelled because of a freak snowstorm which completely shut down the course, so everybody turned up and nobody got to race. Now Van Petegem opened a little bit of a gap here. Max is having to kick out of the saddle to close it down, so they're getting a little bit frisky now as the finish starts to approach, and so do the cobblestones. They've got to liven it up. I think probably Van Petegem has been told that the gap is coming down, and we're now looking at just on 50 seconds.
It's a very difficult race to organise, really, as we look back in the main group. 2 riders from Mapei, if the group does come back together, will certainly be looking for the counter-attack, and I do think that Frank Vandenbroek here, wearing number 207, is thinking about victory there, because he's such an aggressive rider. He wants to win races. He won 17 races last year, which is quite remarkable. A lot of them stages of the Tour of Austria, but here's the first chance really this year we've had to see the man wearing number 1, Laurent Brochard. A great surprise last year, I think, in the World Championships. Everybody thought Laurent Jalabert was going to take that victory for France, but Brochard is a very clever rider. He worked properly for the team, but when it came down to it at the end, he knew just exactly how to time his sprint down that big long avenue in San Sebastian.
It's good to see the Festina team putting a team in this event, because it really isn't their type of race. I thought they might have preferred to have stayed training down in the south of France. Richard Virenque has had his nose out front today. He's gone now, and we've got Bortolami in the breakaway as well.
François de Jeux riders on the frontier. They really are inspired, I think, by the team manager Marc Madio. Madio, a Frenchman, not ever afraid to come and race it over the border in Belgium. He used to like all of the races, like the Tour of Flanders, the Grand Prix E3, which I think he's then managed to get a lot of that information across to his team, because when they do come here, they're at the front, they're aggressive, and they like to take part in the action. But today they have missed out because they didn't manage to get a man into that leading group of 7.
Well, he got a result last year, didn't he, in Paris-Roubaix with Frédéric Guédon taking that surprise victory in the big cobblestone. That classic still to come, of course, as always. And the way the weather is running right now in Europe after a very mild winter, it could be a classic Paris-Roubaix this year, because we're having a lot of rain, although today it's rather a pleasant day.
It certainly is. A lot of these riders, I think, happy the sunshine is out, because it can be so cold in Het Volk. In fact, in many occasions in the past, the snow and sleet has come out to make this one of the most difficult races of the early season. But it is, Phil, for a lot of these riders, the first real rendezvous for them to check and see just how the form and how the training has come so far. As we look now, the time gap's starting to go out, so that little bit of a kick at the front there by Van Petegem has dragged it out again to over the minute mark. 1 minute and 10 seconds to the Laurent Brochard group, and 1:52 to the rest of the main field.
Well, that should be enough now for the riders to take a little bit of the pressure off racing away from the field, and to start concentrating on how they're going to break up this league group of 7, because there are some revered names in this group. André Schmil, Johan Museeuw, last year's winner Peter Van Petegem. They are the names I would expect from the winner to appear from, as we're running down towards 15 miles to go now. They're leaving a decision late. Somebody like Stuart O'Grady might feel confident in the sprint, but the way he's raced the classics last year, he'll look for a move in the last 5 or 6 kilometres, I think.
Well, he's the kind of rider, if he could jump away with 2 or 3 kilometres to go, there's not very many men in this group of 7 who could chase him back, because he really does have a turn of speed and knows how to leap out of a group like that coming into the closing stages. A lot of that technique he's learned from racing on the track, and I'm sure in the back of his mind he wants to improve himself as a roadman and go to Australia and represent Australia in the Olympic Games in 2000, actually on the road as well as the track, and that certainly would be a feather in his cap.
Well, he'll certainly stay involved, I think, in the track till after the Olympic Games in Sydney in 2000, because that's certainly where Stuart will carry the flag high for Australia. He's a very, very good race reader, especially when he rides the points score on the track, and he's converted that very intelligent race reading to his road racing, because he does read the moves, he does get in the breaks, and if you get in the breaks, well, the big win is never going to be too far away.
The chance of racing so much as he has done on the track with some of the great track stars, he has no inhibitions when it comes to riding the road. At the moment he's in the breakaway with some of the best riders in the world, André Schmil and Johan Museeuw, and he's not worried at all about being in their presence, and he's obviously calculating and trying to work out in his mind how he's going to outfox them when it comes down to the finish. And the great thing about O'Grady, I think, is the suppleness that he's got from racing on the track, which really makes him a very good rider on the cobblestones. His weight distribution on the bike is magnificent, but it's that suppleness and combination with the power that he's got which makes him able to ride very quickly over the cobblestones, and not every rider has that ability.
Now, looking down. The roads are getting narrow. These are perfect roads now for a little sprint off the front. These abound in Belgium. Little narrow roads, they were cobbled in the old days, but at the moment it looks as though they found themselves a nice bit of surface here. Asphalt, smooth asphalt. Watch the bronze legs there already of Max van Heeswijk on the left of our picture. Looking ahead there though, Peter van Petegem is never far away from the front now. Stuart O'Grady doing a lot of work in this breakaway. No sign yet of any passengers in this group. The gap is opening up even more now. It's heading up towards 2 minutes. And so they've got the chance now of really getting down to the business here. Rabobank's got the team car in that line.
Well, Phil, as you mentioned, there are no passengers. It did seem to me that Arvis Pizzics, the rider from Jack and Jones, was appearing a lot more at the back of this group, because he's a rider who several years ago had a very good sprint. As the gap now goes out again, another 5 seconds to 1 minute and 20 seconds over the chasing group. So if this group can stay together, Pizzics could be the revelation and the surprise, because his sprinting is quite remarkable. A former member of the Latvian national squad, he rode for Word Perfect, and he's been looking for a great victory since 1996 when he won a stage of the Tour du Pont then. But now he's changed across to this new team, the Jack and Jones squad, and very often when a rider wants to change teams, you really improve a little bit, because you're trying to prove to your own teammates, your new teammates, what kind of a valued rider you are.
Yeah, it's often the case that you find new incentives in life too, because life can get a bit monotonous, though we've had the great faithful riders like Claudio Chiappucci who stayed loyal to one team throughout a star-studded career, and other riders too like Gilbert Duclos-Lassalle as well. Now the Gant team is up, so Roger Leger I think might be driving the car, or Serge Boucherie, and they're just having a little chat, and I guess it'll be in English, so that might fool one or two of them, but not many, because Max speaks English we know of, and certainly Pizzics speaks English, and I would imagine that Peter van Petegem speaks English, Museo does, so they'll all know what he's been told.
So they certainly will, and if it was Roger Leger, he's learned very good English over the last few years, because he spent a lot of time with Greg LeMond when Greg took his victories in the Tour de France, and he's become a very good English-speaking team manager. However, his second-in-command, Serge Boucherie, despite his association with the English-speaking riders over the last few years, has never managed to pick it up, as the riders now go over the 25 kilometres to go banner, so around about 17 miles to the finish.
Serge Boucherie, who came to the team having won the French title on one occasion, former Tour de France rider.
Former teammate of mine, actually. He turned professional for Fiat in 1978 and rode for 2 years on that squad with Rafael Gimignani as the team manager. And then he actually turned amateur again because he wasn't being successful at all. Spent 1 year riding for the ACBB team and then came back as a professional. And that was the year, in fact, riding for the same team as Sean Kelly at the time, Sem Francois, that he took the French title.
Theo de Roy there, assistant team manager of Rabobank, and it looks as though he's calling Max over. He's probably feeling pretty confident now. We know Max can deliver a good finish. He won the last stage of the Tour of Spain with his sprints. In fact, he jumped away and outwitted them in Madrid. But now he's telling Max how he's going to win this race. Theo was a great rider himself, but he wasn't a big winner.
Certainly wasn't, but he knows how to win races. And in fact, I think the sign there coming from Max van Heeswijk was trying to tell Theo de Roy that he wasn't feeling super good at the moment. He looks comfortable in his face, but it may well be that at this stage of the season he's not really quite used to the cold, because let's not forget, most of these riders have been racing in Spain and southern France in very good weather conditions, and coming up here to race in Belgium, it can be a big shock to the system.
Under the 25 kilometres to go banner now for the bunch, so you can see the gap is opening up all the time. The Français des Jeux trying to whip something up into this bunch, but they're really not going places. There's Loughran on the right of our picture. That's where we're headed for now as we approach Lana and the cobblestones. And there aren't too many stretches of cobblestones even left in this area of Belgium now, and it's a great shame in many ways. Of course, the little hills have always stayed with the cobbles.
Certainly will. All of these riders, though, not giving any help at all at the front. This is Servaes Knaven, the former champion of Holland, and number 148 there on the far side riding for Gant. Well, that's Henk Vogels, and his teammate Stuart O'Grady is in the leading group there, so he's never going to put his nose in the front. And there, the rainbow bands of Laurent Brochard, looking very comfortable with his first major outing in Belgium this year. So it'll be interesting to see just how that world champion jersey affects the racing here. But Phil, in fact, there's a major regrouping going on at the back, because the group that was well behind Brochard's group has come up now, wound their way up through the cars, and that is going to, I think, now give the advantage to the leading group of 7, because there's going to be too many riders here and nobody's going to want to work in this group that's chasing.
Yeah, the fact that this group has managed to bridge the gap as well indicates that they're not coordinated in that front group, in this chase group rather, so we've formed a bigger peloton now. 1 or 2 more riders taking a deep breath and a sigh of relief that they've got themselves across to this group, and I think they'll be content with that because this, as I say, is early days in the season and they're getting themselves a really good workout now. But I think the prize winners today are going to come here from these 7 as we enter the first stretch of cobblestones, aptly named a Criminal Strat.
A good name for a stretch, a cobbles Criminal Strat, yeah, and I think a lot of these riders are probably thinking it's pretty criminal at the moment to put this section of cobbles in this race here. But look at Johan Museeuw, the way he just sits so firmly on that machine there, sitting right in the middle of the cobblestones, keeping away from the side of the road there, where that's where you're going to get any punctures if they do happen, because there's lots of little pieces of stone that come into the side of the road there when it rains here in Belgium and cuts the tyres. A short section of cobbles, only 300 metres long, but about 10 kilometres time, Phil. There's a section of cobbles which is almost 1.5 kilometres long, and if anybody does feel strong, that's really the place to attack.
Well, Bortolami chose to hang off the back there by a length or so to keep an eye on what was going on. Van Petegem drops to the rear.
And Petegem's been a great rider over the last few years. In 1991 he was the Belgian national champion. In fact, he was coached by Ferdy van den Hout, because Van den Hout doesn't live too far away, in fact in the small town of Deftinge, so these two riders know each other very well indeed. In fact, it was Van den Hout who encouraged him to turn professional for the PDM squad, and he rode for PDM for a year before then moving on to ride for TVM. And I think since he's fitted in with TVM, he's become a very successful rider, an opportunist who, given the right situation, knows how to jump away from a group of riders like this and get himself stage victories. Exactly how he took victory in Het Volk last year, but not very often that lightning strikes in the same place twice.
No, that's true. But he is a quality rider. O'Grady got himself caught on the edge there. He's dived back into the edge at the moment.
Just because the pressure's being put on at the front there, and I would suggest it's probably by Andre Schmiel, because he loves these kind of roads. He knows just how well to ride over them. I think his advantage is the fact that he sits quite low on the saddle and very far back, giving him an awful lot of stability, and it was in fact the Lotto jersey on the front there putting the hammer down. It just goes to show how much of a specialist this man is, and the man keeping a very close eye on him, Johan Museeuw, because these two riders over the last few years have developed a certain amount of rivalry when it comes to these kind of races in Belgium.
That's right, they're both quality classic performers and both winners of Paris-Roubaix, and of course Schmiel has come very close to winning the Tour of Flanders, but he hasn't come quite as close as Johan Museeuw, who has really been a man of that event as well. Now this is back to the chase field, and we've got here Magnus Backstedt, the Swedish member of the GAN team. So he must feel that breakaway is reasonably safe, because he could be inciting a chase back here up to Stuart O'Grady, but he's trying to go clear on his own just now.
A really strong rider. He's been professional for 3 years now. In fact, he won a victory last year in the Grand Prix of Eastberg, and he's putting a lot of warnings out to everybody else in this main field that if you want to stay at the front of the bunch, you better get onto my wheel, because he's opened up several gaps there, and this group had swelled to around about 35 riders, but the pressure from Backstedt has split it completely over this section of cobbles.
Well, he's trying to be joined here by a rider from La Française des Jeux.
Looked a little bit like Frédéric Guédon, the winner of Paris-Roubaix last year. He actually caught back to that group of Brochard earlier on with Rolf Sorensen. So a lot of big names managed to pull themselves back into this race just over the last 5 or 6 kilometres. And there is Frank van den Broeke, always attentive, and going through as well is Henk Vogels. Henk Vogels will not go to the front, I don't think, because he'll be thinking about giving as much advantage as he can to his own teammate in the front, Stuart O'Grady, because those two riders, they really do work well together. They're definitely a good combination.
Well, it looks as though the Mappy rider there is in fact Michel van Heeke, who's got across in this group, and he's still working hard because there's a chance here. But remember, they've got teammates in the breakaway, so they're not going to overwork now. They've just really raced up to the side of Backstedt, and they're going to hold it at that, I think. Certainly Henk won't go for Stewie, because they're the best of mates as well as being teammates, and they're now sort of dropping back into the pack here as it reforms around them.
241's Brian Home riding for his new team. Another man who's not a stranger to these kind of races in Belgium, but I think the Français de Jeu now trying to stir it up just a little bit, because their man Emmanuel Magnin is in this group as well, and he is a very good sprinter. One of the men who I think later in the season, once we start going to the stage races, is going to be a revelation for France this year, because although he's been a great cyclo-cross rider, when it comes down to the big bunch sprints, he really is a great man. He was picked for the Castorama team a few years ago by Cyril Guimard, and tried to integrate him into the squad as a team sprinter, but he is such a versatile rider. That, I think, Phil, is why he rides so well in these kind of races in Belgium.
Yeah, well, Guimard's a shrewd eye for top talent. As we rejoin the breakaway here, we're around about 18 kilometres from the finish now, and still nobody has tried to get away from the front. But you know, at this time of the year, it's very difficult. They could all be at full stretch here, and that's why they're not opening such a big gap on the chase group behind. Form's a funny thing at this time of the year, and they don't know how they're going to ride such a distance of 202 kilometres.
In fact, it was Bortolami put the pressure on there, but you see, whenever it goes to the cobblestone sections, that green and black red jersey of Lotto is very close to the front. You can see also that sign there indicating 2 more sections of cobblestones left to go, around about 2 kilometres of the cassé, as they call them here in Belgium, before we go down to the finish. Museo now starting to take a little bit of a back seat, but this man is so strong, he can sit at the back on a cobbled section like that, and if there is a split, he can ride himself straight across.
Well, I'm wondering, because funnily enough, this is the one event he's never excelled in. It's missing off his honours list, and now he's put himself into a real possibility here of winning Het Volk today. The weather has stayed nice and dry, and this group has stayed nicely together. And there they are, 6 of them working pretty steadily. André Schmil doing more than his share of work, so too Gianluca Bortolami. Max van Heeswijk, I think you're right, he's not quite as strong as he was in this breakaway now. And Pizik's the big danger man if it comes down to a sprint, and we must never write off Peter van Petegem, who won this event for the first time last year. Incidentally, only 7 riders have ever won this race back-to-back, so the odds are saying that Van Petegem won't win today. I'll quickly give you the other names just for the record. Wilfred Nellison, Eddie Plankett, Fons de Wolf, Freddie Martens, Joe Bruyere, Ernest Sterks and André de Klerk back in 1949 and 1950. They're the men who've won this race 2 years running in the past.
As far as I can think back, an Australian's never won this event, and Stuart O'Grady, Phil, is looking very comfortable indeed. Whenever there's a slight lull in the pace at the front, he moves forward. His pedalling action is very comfortable indeed. He's very calm. You can see the concentration on his face there, and he must think that if he can get over the next couple of sections of cobbles together, he's got a great chance of winning this classic.
Well, absolutely right too, as they check their feet on those pedals. In fact, only 4 nations, Paul, apart from Belgium, have ever won this event. It's been dominated by the Belgians with 45 victories. The other nations are Ireland, Italy, Germany and Holland. And the Irish one, before you all rush and put your hands up and say it was Sean Kelly, well, it wasn't. Here we go back a long way to Seamus Elliott, who was the winner in the 1960, I think it was.
Well, this is the lead of the race. Bortolami, Van Petegem, Van Heeswijk, Schmil, Museo, O'Grady and Arvis Pizix. A real good group, and a lot of the major teams represented, and still the group behind not able to make any impression on the advantage these men had. The last time check we had over race radio was, in fact, it had gone up to 1 minute and 45 seconds, so it's looking good for these men in the front.
Well, they're looking a bit sharp now. There's lots of changes in directions at the moment, which helps. Because the monotony is broken from the long straight highways. They're now paying much closer attention to each other because they knew that the stretches of cobblestones were coming very quickly, one after another. And the fact is they've been too alert, I think, because nobody has tried to go here for the finish in Lochran. They've just stayed together now. Just the one stretch left at Koningsstraat, King Street, 600 metres of it.
I feel sure this is when our man André Schmil is going to move to the front. He's actually sitting 3 from the back at the moment, so he could well be waiting for the final section of cobblestones, which is almost 1.5 kilometres long. He doesn't want to make the move here. He's leaving that up to Stuart O'Grady in first position. Van Heeswijk, realising that the attacks are going to come on the cobbles, has moved up into second, so that if anything does happen, he can try and cover the move, because I think all that Van Heeswijk would like is for the group to stay together all the way to the finish line. But certainly an attack must come from either Museo or André Schmil, because those men are the big specialists. But there's a lot of power there in the stroke there of Stuart O'Grady on the front. He really looks comfortable on the cobbles.
He's riding them beautifully right now, which is as fast as you can go across them. Sit nice and steady on the bike. Nobody willing to go past him because there's no real point. Just hang on to the wheel in front, and you have to put your faith in that wheel in front as well and hope he chooses the right line, because any holes in those cobbles, you won't see them coming at you now. Just on 10 miles to go.
It's going to be a very tricky section of cobbles, the next section, when these riders come there, because they are very long, and if you have got the power, then you can open a gap of 10 or 15 seconds over them. But for the moment, Stuart O'Grady not looking around, not expecting anybody to come and help him. It is difficult to work as a group on the cobblestones, and if you take the advantage of being the first man to come on there, it's usually a situation of, well, you have to sit there right through till the end. They're off the cobblestones now, and Max van Heeswijk, wearing number 24 in the orange jersey of Rabobank, coming straight up to try and keep the speed very high in this group, because he's starting, I think, Phil, to feel a little bit confident, because the group still hasn't split and the attacks haven't come. And I would have expected something to come from André Schmil, because he looks comfortable, he looks very strong, and he still hasn't done anything very special when we've come to the cobblestone sections.
I think you're right, actually. I think a number of riders in this breakaway were starting to go into that period where they were losing interest, they were getting tired. Now they've been revitalised exactly by the fact that nobody's attacked them over these cobblestones. And you know, Gianluca Bortolami is always a danger in this type of breakaway, because he is an opportunist who finds himself in many good positions in big time bike racing, and given his chance, he'll take the victory. And there's only ever been one Italian won this, and that's Franco Ballerini.
Great victory by him. He took off on his own and just showed everyone his back wheel, and what a great rider he is when it comes to events like Paris-Roubaix. It's not very often that the Italians really adore these races in Belgium, especially the Flemish-speaking part where there's so many cobblestones, lots of side winds, and normally bad climatic conditions. But Ballerini has always been a man to come up here and perform well, and Bortolami is the kind of rider who can excel in bad conditions as well. He's won a stage in the Tour de France back in 1994, but over the last couple of years he really doesn't seem to have had the luck. He's broken his leg, and as you said earlier, he broke an elbow on one occasion as well, and he's been fighting to find his form. But as an integral part of the Festina squad, he's always the man prepared to do the work of a domestique.
A valuable man to have around when he stays fit and well. Now nice wide roads again here. Max not missing a turn at all.
Funny to see these two riders alongside each other now in different jerseys, because in fact they rode along on the same team, because last year Arvis Pizix on the back here rode for the Rabobank squad, and there's confirmation. The gap still 1 minute and 28 seconds, so it's come back just a little bit, but not enough, I don't think, Phil, to put these 7 riders into danger. And certainly we now must be looking at the winner of Het Volk coming from these 7 men.
And if André Schmil gets his way, and he's number 37 there, Museo looks over his shoulder to make Stuart O'Grady come and close the gap. He's having none of it, despite the fact that O'Grady has been a real pile driver in this breakaway, doing a lion's share of the work. Museo does just enough. He goes through all the time, keeps an eye on everybody. So too Van Petegem. Bortolami's working well. It's been a very compact little group, this, because they've held the field off, but they've never really escaped from the clutches of that field. And if fortunes had gone the other way on the cobblestones, they could have well been shut down. But I think it's safe now, and well, they're not all going to win the sprint. Somebody is going to have to go before the finish and take a gamble at finishing 1st or 7th, I think.
Certainly will, that's the idea, but I think we should really call him Mr. Museo, because he is, I think, the man of the classics over the last 10 years. Since the retirement of Sean Kelly, this man here, Johan Museo, has been the man for the classics. And whenever he looks at these riders, I think they must have a little bit of a worry, because they realise that when he looks at you and he tells you to go through, then that's the thing you should be doing.
Well, it looks as though he's fallen over in a pot of paint, doesn't it, really, Johan Museo? And he fell off to the left by the look of it as well, as he goes through off the wheel of Bortolami. Bortolami's chosen the good wheel to follow. Maybe he feels that Museo is the man to mark. Van Petegem marking Bortolami. 11, just on 12 kilometres to go to the finish. That's around about 7 miles. And the opportunist, well, there's a number of riders in this breakaway who we always talk about as being opportunists, but maybe they just haven't got the legs today.
Well, it's always difficult, the first big rendezvous of the season, the Het Volk, the first real opener for the season of Belgium as well. Everybody turns out to see this race. But I would think now in about 2 kilometres we're going to come to that next section of cobblestones. Now, if I was a rider not feeling quite so good in this group at the moment, what I would do is either put myself onto Johan Museo's wheel or André Schmil's wheel, because I do feel certain, Phil, that one of those riders is going to put the hammer down on this next section of cobblestones and try and go it alone before the finish, because there are too many riders who've got a good sprint when it comes down to the final few kilometres.
Kees Priem, another man who's ridden well in the past, now managing TVM and pulls off some great victories every year for his team. when we never really think of the TVM as being a top stream team. Of course it is. And Case passing on words of wisdom to Peter Van Petegem, last year's winner. He wears number 11, by the way, instead of number 1 today, because they've given the world champion, Laurent Brochard, the right to wear number 1.
Jean-Luc Van den Broeke, the uncle of Frank, coming to the front there in the Lotto team car to have a word with his man, André Schmil, explaining the situation behind and probably telling him now not to worry about any return from the main field behind, because in fact all the impetus has gone out of those riders there, and explaining to him this is where you have to do it. This is the section of cobblestones coming up now, around about 1.5 kilometres, and all of these riders still prepared to work until they get there, Phil, but once they get there I really do think somebody's going to have to make a move.
Well, we're on virtually the outskirts of Lochran now, just about 5 miles from the finish, or 8 kilometres.
These riders all starting to feel nervous. You can see as soon as the line moves up on the right hand side, they're twitching across to stay on the slipstream of the rider in front, because they realise they don't want to stay too far to the back of this line here. In fact, Jean-Luc getting a little bit of interview from Belgian television there, I think, to ask just exactly what tactics are coming from his team as their new Belgian, André Schmil, heads into what for him is going to be a very important section of cobblestones.
Well, Van Petegem now, a little bit of cat and mouse, bit of freewheeling going on here now. Van Petegem, as noted, has stopped working in the breakaway at the moment ever since Case Preen came up and spoke to him. He's lying off the back of the group here as Pizix looks over and decides to go behind Van Petegem, but it may be that he's thinking of putting in an attack on the cobbles. I must say, Paul, I like the new colours of Lotto this year that they've come out with.
Certainly a lot brighter than the colours they had last year, but that's very often the tactic of Case Preen. He has no qualms at all about coming up to a group of 7 riders who've been working very well for the last 30 kilometres or so and telling his rider to sit on. He's not worried about the group coming back from behind now. He's now thinking about winning the race. He doesn't care what the other riders in this group think of his man, but in fact he's making sure that he can put all of the chances onto his team's chances of winning. And still 1 minute 30 seconds, so it's not going anywhere, that gap, and I think certainly these riders with around about 10 kilometres to go, 6 miles, they must feel quite confident.
Well, they've nudged another second into the lead here. This is the Group Museo. I thought they might have called it the Group Van Petegem because he did win the race last year, but there we are. Museo is the big favourite here in Belgium, and they could do with the Belgian victory to start the season off well. They had a great cyclocross season, the Belgians, eclipsing the World Championships in that department, and it remains to be seen whether they can carry it through on the road, because they've got 1 or 2 very good riders now in Belgium. They still live, as they do every year, in the shadow of the great Eddy Merckx, but one day they'll break out.
Certainly will. It may well be that Frank Van den Broeke is going to be the man, because everybody's talking about Van den Broeke being the next Eddy Merckx. Just 23 years of age and already a great string of victories to his name. Now, very shortly, we're going to get onto the cobblestones. You see Museo now moving up through the outside. Everybody's been working in 2 lines up until now, but now that the cobblestones are starting to get a little bit closer, everyone wants to be in the first 2 or 3 places.
Well, great, he's come to the back here, and is he itching to get off the front? He's riding right on the back by Arvis Pizix. They've hit the cobblestones now. Pizix goes off into the soft dirt on the right. It can be a good idea. It can also be very dangerous if the ruts form in the cobbles there. O'Grady piling on the pressure, starting to watch for little gaps that are forming and close them down.
Strange, Phil, but at the moment it's Max van Heeswijk setting the pressure on at the front here. In about 3rd position, you can see the red, green and black jersey of Lotto. That's André Schmil. He hasn't made a move at all, and I would have thought on this very long section of cobblestones this would be where they have a chance to split the whole thing apart.
Well, they're letting Max do the pace. Bortolami is in 2nd place, Schmil is in 3rd, and then we've got Van Petegem and Museu. But they don't look like men who are looking to do anything at all here other than just set the pace over the cobblestones. There's nobody looking over the rider in front, beginning to get a little bit twitchy. It does look as though they're going to take this race right down to the line and may the best sprinter win. And there's about 4 riders here we could call sprinters too. It could be a good finish.
Certainly could. Right on the back here, Jack and Jones, Arvis Pizix. Van Petegem now not very happy with the speed of this group over the cobblestone. In fact, he's going to the front rather quickly, not just to move up to number 1 slot, but to go off the front. So good move by him.
So Van Petegem has made his move. He must have sensed that nobody was going to do anything here. He came smoothly up the left and has gone clear. Now surely there must be a reaction here from Schmil and Museo. That's what the others will be saying. But he's opened a gap very, very quickly. It seemed as though they were all deciding it was going to be a group sprint, and Van Petegem has decided, well, it may not be, because he's got an enormous gap. I can only presume they've expected a reaction from the big names who have said we're not countering the move, and look what's happened.
Well, that's remarkable, because I would have expected the attack to come from the man in third or fourth position, Schmiel or Museo, because this is the ideal place for those two riders to make the move. But that is the canniness of Kees Priem, the team manager of TVM. This is a long way to go. There's still 10 kilometres to go to the finish. So these riders giving him a little bit of a lead at the moment, and probably banking on the fact that once they get off the cobblestones, they can start to work together and pull him back. So a gamble by Van Petegem, and it may well be that this is a good move.
Well, it's certainly good so far. Just look at the gap he's opened here in very short time, which means he's probably left at twice the speed of that breakaway to open a gap like that. A lot of people here in this straight line with gaps between wheels. There's nobody thinking of countering the move at all. They may wait till they get off the cobblestones and then see what they can produce. But Schmiel looking a little bit perplexed here as he swings off the front, and nobody seems to be putting their head down to try and close this gap.
Well, Schmiel trying to stir it up over the last bit of those cobbles there, and helped amiably there by the man in second position, Johan Museo. The group's starting to work now, 15 seconds to Van Petegem, but they're going to have to put the hammer down very quickly if they want to pull this man back, because now we're inside 5 miles from the finish, and Schmiel and Museo certainly should have been more attentive over those cobblestones, because in previous years there's always been an attack on that section there, and Museo actually not looking too good.
No. He isn't, is he? He's got his tongue out. Always a bad sign for Johan. He's obviously just making the pace, but it's not like a man trying to chase down a breakaway. Van Petegem may have made the right move here, hitting them just at the moment.
Well, everybody's going to be worried about the position of Max van Heeswijk in that group too, because they realise even if Max is not having a great day today, he is the fastest man in that group, so they're obviously going to look for a little bit of work to come from him as well. So there's always the rivalry too between Schmiel and Museo. Those two riders will try and work together to bring back this man Van Petegem, but they won't give everything. They won't be wholeheartedly pushing into this, because they realise in the group as well there's some good sprinters. So he's got the advantage for the moment, but still it's an awful long ride on your own.
Well, he's a brave man, because he's obviously a marked man as the winner last year, and he's not waited for anything. He's just put his head down and gone. He got a little inspiration there from a look over his right shoulder and jumped out the saddle as he could see where the rest of the race is. But round about 10 to 15 seconds the gap at the moment. Let's have a look as we flash back to the breakaway. Here he comes, started right on the tail, perfect place for an attack. Nobody in the line even took a glance as to who was coming through. It was almost as if they haven't seen him go at all.
It was an ideal situation for him, because in fact two of the slower riders on the cobblestones were on the front there. It was Max van Heeswijk and Bortolami. I don't think he would have been able to go out quite so fast if it had been a Museo or a Schmiel on the front on that cobble section there. But in fact he's notched out another 2 seconds, so 17 seconds is advantage over the group of 6 riders now, and they're going to have to do something special to pull back this man, because having won last year he must be riding like a man possessed.
He loves this race, and as I said earlier, he lives on the course at Opbrakel. So he knows every inch of this road, and he'll be a very popular winner if he can pull it off. Winning it 1 year is good, but winning it 2 years is a very difficult thing to do. Well, they've pulled back a second for what it's worth. If he can hover at that, he'll be happy and content. Last chance for a drink. Max van Heeswijk is sitting at the back of the line, but this isn't the working group we had before when Van Petegem was in it. And the Schmiel is now sensing that Stuart O'Grady perhaps is tiring. Schmiel has put in an attack and gone to the far right. Bortolami is the man to mark him. Museo, Paul, I don't think has got the firepower. He wants to go, but the legs won't carry him over. Max has come over now. Now Museo's got the wheels.
Very difficult after 200 kilometres at this stage of the game there. Museo realising that Van Heeswijk wasn't going to close down the gap now. I think in fact he's taken up the chase personally to try and nail back the former Russian, Moldovan, Ukrainian, Belgian rider.
Well, I tell you what, Schmiel is such a fighter. He wasn't going to let this go without having one go at Van Petegem, but now he needs somebody to come and continue the momentum. It's going to need 2 or 3 of those flurries to try and close down this gap, which is only on 15 seconds now.
The only way you can pull back a rider at this stage of the game, Phil, is to work together. And what's happening if Schmiel keeps attacking like that is going to be the advantage for Van Petegem, because there's no consistent speed in the second group. Admittedly, it will go up to 32, 33 miles an hour, but every time that rider gets caught, it'll slow down again to 26, 27 miles an hour, while all the time the man we're looking at here, Van Petegem, is riding consistently at 28, 29 miles an hour, building up a very good lead. And you could see there his performances in Het Volk over the last few years. He's always been there and thereabouts.
Well, this is going to be a great result for the TVM team, who've got themselves a big co-sponsor this year in Farm Fritz. And that'll be a nice start to the season if it's to be. Let's have a little look down the road. It's getting further, I think. Now we're looking at about 15, 16 seconds. That little group now looking goes back all together again. And O'Grady setting the pace once more. Schmill dropping down the line a little bit. Museo driving them through. They've got the speed, but they haven't got quite the same speed as Van Petegem right now. You see, Schmill has had to come straight back up to the front. He hasn't even bothered to go to the back of the line. There's now only about 3 riders with real strength left in this chase group, I think.
But now that the hammer's really gone down, you can see the gaps appearing once either Schmill or Museo goes to the front, as the man at the head of the race goes under 5 kilometres to go. 3 miles for him. It really does appear that the big drive has gone out of the chasers behind, because they haven't got it. I think now the leg's starting to hurt, and it's always very difficult when you ride the first classic of the season, because the pressure is on. You've had the training races like the Ruta del Sol or the Tour of the Mediterranean with stages of 130, 140 kilometres, but this is the first big one.
And there's 5 kilometres for the chasers. Het Volk, by the way, means the people or the folk. And you can't get more of a hometown winner, I don't think, in this event than the man who's up front at the moment, Peter Van Petegem. And he's racing now, inspired as he is. He spent the winter dreaming of a repeat victory in Het Volk, and I wouldn't have said it 10 minutes ago, but now I think he's got it.
He's got a very good chance, but you see there's still the possibility, Phil, of a reaction to come from Schmill. 4 kilometres to go, 25 seconds, but if somebody puts in a searing attack from behind, there's still the possibility of leaping across to this man. He jumped away on that final section of cobblestones there with 10 kilometres remaining, but there's no organisation in this group. Nobody really wants to put their head on the line and go out and try and pull him back.
Only 4 kilometres to go now, inside 3 miles, and Van Petegem knows every inch of the way to the finish line in Lokeren, and this is going to be a great moment for him. There's his UCI ranking, had his highest ranking in 97, 59th. He slipped a little bit now the season's opened up, but he's going to climb after this victory.
Certainly will. Stuart O'Grady at the back there wearing 145, and Max van Heesewijk. For them, I think, wondering about what would have happened if they could have just kept the pace a little higher on those cobblestones to prevent that attack. And you can see now the legs starting to wait, because the gap's appearing all of the time now. This is a very critical moment in the race, because if you're not careful and you let the wheel go, then you just cannot nail it back.
Well, I am very surprised they allowed Van Petegem, last year's winner, to make it look so easy on that last stretch of cobblestones. It can only mean they were tired. He hit the combination in the right order as well. Now you see O'Grady opens a gap here and lets other people go through. Schmill in no hurry either. A little bit of the spice out of his legs. There from the helicopter you can see exactly the work to be done. Now we're looking at around about 2+ kilometres to the finish, and that gap I think is enough. The fact all the cars are in there, I was going to say, means it's around 30 seconds, but it is in fact 24 seconds back to the main chase.
And still, all that Van Petegem has to do is to keep a good tempo, keep riding consistently, not weaken at all over this last 3 kilometres, and he's got this race in the bag. But he knows now, and I think he'll be getting a little bit of extra force knowing that he won this event last year, and he'll know what's going on behind. He'll know that there's going to be the rivalry between Museo and André Schmill. He'll know that they won't want to carry the sprinters to the finish to catch him up, and all he can do now is just give every last little bit of energy that he's got in his body to drag himself to the finish line in Lokeren.
And the win here, of course, sets him up for the season in his 6th year as a professional bike rider. He's been through 1 or 2 teams in his time, but he seems to have found his home here with TVM.
Certainly has. This is a race, a team of musketeers. They all go out and fight, and they look for the individual victories. On paper, they're not a super strong team, but every individual rider has a great chance of victory, because they always put their men into the breakaways. Whenever you look at these races over the cobblestones and the races in Belgium and the breakaway forms, it's very rare that you see the break go without a man from TVM there.
And Arvis Pizziks refusing to do the work here, but Johan Museo having none of it. Make sure that Pizziks goes in front of him, but they've lost the full coordination now, and it looks as though Museo hasn't quite got his form yet, although a good high finish in Het Volk is assured now, because these will claim the top 7 places. There's nobody going to come across now. The time gap has gone out on the leader to over 2 minutes. 2 kilometres to go.
Certainly is. This man looking very comfortable indeed now, dropping to the back of the group once more. André Schmill, is he thinking of a late attack to try and surprise everybody? Must be frustrating for him, because he's still got a lot of strength. I think he underestimated the power of Johan Museo this afternoon, because he was probably expecting some form of attack over that last section of cobblestones there. And you can see by the way Schmill is riding that he's ready to have another dig.
21 seconds, so the gap is now pegged, and I don't think anybody's going to come back, but Schmil down below has decided he can't let it go without giving it one last fling as he shoots away from the front of the peloton, or the escape group as it is now. They're scrambling across the gap, and that's the word, Paul, but they are getting across the gap.
And he was marked admirably there by Johan Museo, his arch rival. He knew that this was the last chance for him. Just a slight climb over that little bridge there over the motorway, and he felt that that was where he could have a go. Look at the nod of the head there. That's trying to encourage Johan Museo to come through with him, but he's not giving everything. And it's split the group. Max van Heeswijk, riding cleverly, has managed to get onto the back of the line there, as has also Stuart O'Grady, the Australian.
Yeah, that's the sign that Museo hasn't got his legs there today, because he caught Schmil and made no effort to give him a hand and try and rip away, because if they had the strength there would be probably a three-man chase group now heading after Van Petegem, but they've all regrouped behind, and Van Petegem unaware, but I'm sure he would expect those counter-attacks as he continues to hold his rhythm at round about 30 miles an hour now, knowing that with every turn of those pedals he is inching closer in the last few thousand metres of this event, and he's about to win it for the second time in succession, and that'll be the 8th man to do it.
It certainly will. There's the group now, 6 riders come over the line there, showing them 1 kilometre remains for them, and it's amazing because they could almost reach out and touch Van Petegem, but because they're not working together, they cannot close the distance between themselves and the lone leader, and he now is picking up the pace just a little bit as he comes into the final few metres.
Well, we always talk about these early season classics in Belgium as being semi-classics, but of course they pull together all of the big riders who like the single day events. It's the opening up now of the racing in Flanders, coming up of course the Tour of Flanders and Ghent-Wevelgem, and these riders are going to go in on a high now, having started off well, and this man in particular, well, he's just got to get to the far end of the crowd which is building up in the city of Lokeren, and he'll be seeing the finishing line for the second time in 12 months, and he's looking pretty happy about it now. He's even getting ready for the victory salute. Just made sure nobody was sneaking up behind him, and I don't blame him. Straighten out the new TVM colours for the 1998 season. Another quick check over your shoulder, and now enjoy it, because this was a great victory by Peter Van Petegem. He hit them hard on the cobblestones. They didn't react. He must be a little surprised by the fact there was no reaction, but he won't care now because the first prize is his for a second year in succession. Last man to do it was Wilfred Nellison in 1993 and 1994. Gianluca Bortolami, the ever-present danger, has got away from them just by the skin of his shorts. He gets second place, and taking third over the line there, it looked as though it was André Schmil, the ever-consistent man he is. That's the second time he's finished third in this event.
Certainly is consistent when it comes to this event, Het Volk, the Omloop Het Volk, but this is how the win went for Peter Van Petegem. 2 riders on the front of the cobblestones, Van Heeswijk, and in second position Bortolami there, but the speed he went here, Phil, it just goes to show that he'd planned this. He was waiting to see if there was going to be any reactions for the 2 big names, Museo and Schmil. There was no reaction, no attack, so he decided to take the race into his own hands, and he really went about twice as fast as anyone else.
And Museo only in 4th place today, Max the sprinter taking 5th, Stuart O'Grady was 6th in the end, did an awful lot of work though, and Pizik's 7th. Best of the rest today was Servaes Knaven, fittingly enough, another TVM rider. So the sun shines on Lokeren, it shines on Van Petegem, and we'll be back with you as the season unfolds as we tour around Flanders watching the big ones.